Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In, where we believe in the importance of paid medical and family leave. And Vote Her In is a collaboration between two broads talking politics and Rebecca Sive, who is the author of Vote Her In and an upcoming book, which she should pitch as soon as I turn it over to her. So, hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and glad to be here. Maybe I will pitch it, but more importantly, I want to pitch a very big welcome to our special guest this evening on Voter In, Dr. Abbie Hodgson, who is the director of the Ascend Fund. And as you all know from listening and watching this program, our focus is always on what we can do to help women move to higher levels, be more influential in the political and governmental spheres. And Abbie has these days, and I hope for years and years to come, a singular role in doing that as director of the fund, which essentially supports the organizations that are increasing and working to get more women into public office. And that's what we're going to talk about, the fund's strategy for doing that and its particular focus on state legislatures, which I find particularly compelling as a notion, having spent a lot of years of my life in Springfield, Illinois, with too many male legislators. But that's like a cocktail conversation. Right? But so Abbie comes to us from New York, but she grew up in Kansas, I believe, and she was there doing a lot of wonderful things and some unusual things, for instance, being the chief of staff to the head of the state legislature, and she then got a PhD, which we can hear more about as well. But then she went on and she, among other things, which I found really interesting, was at Pew Charitable Trusts, working with the staff there and the leadership on developing strategies to, in the legislative context, to get their policy priorities addressed. So she's now been at the Ascend Fund for a couple of years and is going to tell us all about it. And I guess what I want to say, just as a final fun note, is when you read her biography at the Ascend Fund, you'll see that the last line, I had to laugh, talks about the fact that she's a champion pie maker. So I thought that was particularly fitting, given that we're going right into Halloween in a couple of days, and then, of course, Thanksgiving. So welcome, Abbie. And I think what we'll do is I'll just kick off by asking you to tell us about the fund, why it was started, and what its particular goals in starting and continuing are.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rebecca and Kelly. I'm a huge fan of the pod and just thrilled to be with you today. The Ascend Fund was initially conceptualized in 2018. And as you may remember, that was tagged as the second year of the woman, the first, of course, being 1992. And as we took a look at those numbers, of course, anytime we see an increase in women serving in elected office, we're thrilled. But women were still only 25% of members of Congress in 2018. And it had taken us 100 years to get to that point with women voting. And we looked at the trajectory and we thought, at this rate, it's going to take us another 100 years to get gender parity for women in politics. And I'm guessing you feel the way that I do, and that simply was unacceptable. This is something I want to achieve in my lifetime, not another 100 years. And so we took a step back and asked, what would it take if we really wanted to accelerate the pace of change? And what we found, and this is no surprise to you two, is that when women run, women win. And the real problem is we don't have enough women running for office. The percentage of women candidates tracks really closely with the percentage of women serving in office. So if you have women as 25% of candidates, they tend to be 25% of elected office holders, give or take a percentage point or two. And so we really wanted to invest in organizations that were doing the recruitment, the pipeline development, helping to bring more women into this space, so they felt confident and like they had the tools to run for office. And so in order to do that, we realized two things. One, stellar organizations already existed. We didn't need to create yet another organization to do this work. But what we found was those organizations were massively underfunded. So even the biggest, best names at the time had a budget of about $1 million a year and were operating with 3 to 5 staff members. And then second, the organizations were really disconnected. So everyone shared this mission and this goal of electing more women, but they weren't coordinating together. So we thought that with a collaborative fund, we could infuse the space with dollars, while also help to coordinate across the entities to create a strategy to get us there faster.
So, can you talk to us some about the incredible achievements that you have had so far in this work?
Yeah, so we are thrilled to have invested over $6 million in this space to date. We maintain a national portfolio of 12 nonpartisan nonprofit organizations, and they're a really diverse portfolio of organizations. So some like She Should Run help women conceptualize what it might mean to be a political leader. We have very traditional training programs, like Vote, Run, Lead. And then we also have what we call political homes for individual affinity groups that have some unique barriers that they face. So Higher Heights works with Black women, Victory Institute with LGBTQ+, Latinas Represent with Latinas, New American Leaders with first and second generation Americans. So we've really built out a portfolio that is reflective of what we want to see our democratic leaders look like. And we've found that the strategy is working. In 2020, the entities trained over 36,000 women to run for political office, which is just mind-blowing when you think about how we're flooding the pipeline with women candidates, because so often in politics, we get caught up with the next election, right? Oh, 2021, the most important election of our lifetime, 2022, 2024. And that's fine, but this isn't something that we're going to achieve next year. It's something that's going to take us some time. So filling this pipeline with qualified candidates is a really great first step. And then the second step when they run for office is whether or not they win. And those who go through our partner training programs are twice as likely to win than the national average. So the candidates won 70% of their primaries and over 60% of their general elections, which is really a staggering number. So we're really excited about what they're able to collectively accomplish. And then, of course, we just launched a 3-state pilot in Washington, Michigan, and Mississippi. So more to come on that.
Yeah, I want to jump in and hear about 3 of my favorite states, actually. I have lots of, I think I've told you this, Abbie, family members in Washington, what my Yiddish mother-in-law would call mishpucha, people who aren't directly related, but who are family in Mississippi. And of course, I spend lots of time here in Michigan. But before we get to talking about that, I just want to go back a second to these data points you mentioned, which really are remarkable, and ask you about whether there are conclusions you can draw about what kind of women are making this choice and what kind of women seem to be winning and getting this job done that they want to get done.
Yeah, I think what's most exciting for me is when I look at our reporting data, the women who are going through these programs and are being successful are far more diverse than those who might have previously come before them. So if you look at the composition of women in Congress over the last 50 years, it is predominantly white women. Many times it skews Democratic, and we're seeing far greater diversity. There's a record number of Black women in the U.S. House. Of course, there's no Black women in the Senate anymore, so we need to do work on that. But it's exciting to see women from various backgrounds, and I don't just mean racial backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, diversity in terms of geographic location, rural and urban, be successful because they've been connected with an organization that's invested in providing them the support they need in order to run a great campaign.
And do you see, in addition to the diversity that you mentioned, do you see sort of personal characteristics or family background, regardless of the other diversity factors that seem to play a role?
Yeah, so we've got more moms than ever before and more single moms serving in elected office, which is great. In large part, I want to give a shout out to our partner, Vote Mama, who works to support them by allowing campaign funds for childcare. And then additionally, I think a big shift that I've seen over the course of my career is that women are able to run as their authentic self. previously they were forced into this mold of adopting relatively masculine characteristics in order to succeed. And we're seeing them show up as authentic whole selves, and the voters actually love this real person in front of them because they relate to them. They help, they know and live the same experiences that the voters are. And so that's a real difference that I've seen too.
So related to that, and you've picked 3 states that are diverse and important and quite different. Can you talk to us about this state legislative strategy, how you pick the states, what is the trajectory of accomplishment that you hope to see, the kinds of women you hope to encourage to run?
Yeah. So our goal is to achieve 50% representation in all 50 states by 2050, although one of our advisory committee members resides in DC, and I told her I would happily update this to 51% in 51 states by 2050 should DC get statehood in the near future. But yes, so the first characteristic we were looking at when we picked these pilot states was where they were at on the spectrum and in the run up to parity, right? And so Washington is a state that has 42% women in their state legislature. For a very long time, they were number 1 in the nation, but then they slid back about 10 percentage points and had to regain all of that progress they had made previously. And so this idea of how do we sustain progress once we achieve it and then push people and organizations over the finish line is really important when we think about Washington. In contrast, in Michigan, parity has really made a lot of progress in recent years. So prior to the 2018 election, women were 25% of state legislators in Michigan, but they're now 31%. So they made this big jump. So then what do we do again to sustain that progress and keep it moving forward at that dramatic rate? And then Mississippi is really illustrative of a lot of the states in the South. They struggle to elect women. Only 16% of their state legislature is women, and they've never crossed the 20% threshold. So there's really just a lot of work to do in Mississippi. So it's great that we're starting now. And then, of course, the states are geographically spread out across the U.S. They're very politically different. Washington is blue, Michigan is purple, Mississippi is red. And then each state also has a unique political feature that can affect positively or negatively their ability to elect women. So Michigan, as you know, Rebecca, has term limits in their state legislature, which means we're constantly having to recruit more women to fill the pipeline. In Mississippi, there are no campaign finance limits on state leg races, which anyone that's ever had to raise money, that makes their heart rate go up just thinking about it. So that can be a real challenge for women. And then Washington has the top 2 primary system, oftentimes casually referred to as ranked choice voting. And that's been perceived as a positive for women to get more women into office. So we'll take a look at all the strategies we test in these states, see what we learn, and then apply it to more states as we expand.
Can you talk too about strategy for getting women and more women into positions of real sort of leadership and power? It's really important to get this representation, but it's also important to make sure that they're speakers of the House and things like that. So can you talk some about that strategy as well?
Yeah. So even as we see women's numbers increase in state legislatures, there's still a really small proportion of leaders in those bodies. And it is the leaders that determine what bills move forward for a vote or taken up. And so until women are in leadership positions, they're not going to have the power that's required to really move public policy, change outcomes, and really transform our democracy, I think, in the way that we would all like to see.
One of the things, going back a minute to what's going on, for instance, in Mississippi, if I recall this correctly, one of the ways in which that state has been successful, it has a greater Black population than any other state, as you know, and as a consequence, there have been lots of Black women elected, for instance, as mayors of tiny little towns. And one of the things I just flashed in my brain while you were talking. When I wrote my book, Every Day is Election Day, I featured 4 women from Mississippi, actually. And that was intentional because I wanted to say, and of course you're going to bring this to fruition. But my goal then was to say, there are women doing this work everywhere, right? And various kinds of women. And I'm wondering whether you, in that context, whether as your organizations identify women to run for the legislature and go around these states, are you going to be looking specifically at women who've, even though you run as your authentic self, more so than before, are you going to be looking for women who have had some sort of political or civic leadership experience?
Yeah, so I think that you will see a lot of women move from local law office into state office into federal office. I believe about 30% of our members of Congress previously served in a state legislature. So it is a really important launching ground for a longer term political career. So we're really, though, looking for anyone who cares about their community and wants to make an impact. There is no requirement or qualification to run for the state legislature other than you just care about your community and you want to make a difference. So if folks have local experience, that's fantastic. Let's move them on up through the pipeline, but it's also certainly not a requirement for any woman who's thinking about running for office for the first time.
Can I say to you, this is such a sort of, I've heard others express this idea, and of course, Vote, Run, Lead and others are talking about run as you are, right? Which is an incredibly powerful and important message. But as you noted before, but just to underscore, it's such a dramatic difference in the strategy and the expectation and the notion of women running. It was just really always the case until quite recently.
Right. We all know that men wake up one day and say, I want to be president of the United States, run and win, right? No one tells them, oh, well, you've got to start on school board and go to city commission and then state legislature and then executive. And then, no one ever tells a man that, and he wouldn't contemplate it. And so we want women to understand that same message of, if you care, you're qualified and you should run. And always happy to have conversations with women about what the right fit is for their background, experience, and interest, right? If you really care about public education and your kid's school, then maybe school board is right. But the state legislature allocates an awful lot of money towards education, and that can be really important. So just finding the right fit for you is what's important.
So speaking of money, can you talk a bit, I know you've been thinking about this and mentioned it in earlier conversations, about the issue of the pay scale and what that means for women who are thinking about running or who are elected?
Yeah. So I just heard from someone the other day that their school board meets for 5 hours in the middle of like a Wednesday afternoon, which is pretty exclusionary to anyone who has a quote unquote real job from 9 to 5 or works during the day. How would you ever take 5 hours out of your day midweek every single week? As we look toward state legislatures, pay can be abysmal. Yes, it can be a part-time job, meaning you're part-time in the Capitol, but anyone who's ever done that work is so committed to their constituents that they're easily working 40, 60, 80 hours a week at that, which can make holding a steady job really challenging. And we believe strongly that women from all backgrounds, and men too, quite frankly, all socioeconomic backgrounds, shouldn't be limited from serving in office because of the low salary or the irregular hours. So there are programs like the Women's Democracy Lab that are offering fellowships to women legislators. And then we're working on a strategy for how we increase pay to ensure that it's full-time and a living wage to allow legislators to do this with their whole heart.
So can you share with us how that works? What can you do to implement a strategy, or what does the strategy look like?
Yeah, so we're just in the initial stages of what this may look like. Obviously, state legislators vote on their own pay, and it's generally a really political vote. And if you vote to increase your salary, think if I voted to increase my pay 500%, right? The voters would just riot. But there's also a common misconception around what our politicians are paid, right? People think they're paid $250,000 a year, which is really far from the truth. So part of it is going to be public education so that they're more accepting of this pay raise. We believe that we'll need to get legislators from both sides of the aisle to vote on this so that it isn't politicized. And I think the more states that we can move at once, the better. So if your neighbor jumps and you jump, there's a little bit of safety in numbers. So like I said, we're just beginning to conceptualize what this advocacy movement could look like, but it's a really important issue. We hear it from candidates all the time. I'd love to run, but I can't afford it. Or even people who get into elected office and they go, oh, I thought I could make my monthly family budget stretch and I just can't. And so they have to either resign or only serve one term.
And it's striking how different the different states are, right? So I live in Illinois, where it is a living wage if you're a state legislator, and there are some states that don't actually pay anything. It's like a per diem.
Right. Yeah, you get like $200.
Yeah.
But I believe the average is about $30,000 a year.
Which, of course, is impossible for a single mom.
Exactly, right? And yeah, especially if you're having to travel back and forth to the Capitol and it's a long way from your home. And again, that's assuming that they're going to have another job, which it's really challenging to work into the demanding schedule.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking on this point. I was talking last night to a group of women from the League of Women Voters in suburban Chicago. And I actually was reflecting, I mean, they're devoted, they're working hard. We were, talking about a program they're going to be doing. And I got off the phone or the Zoom, I should say, and I was thinking about the fact that, these were all working women. And, I remember back in the day when, yes, some of the women work, but many more were, like full-time volunteers or part-time volunteers. And, not to get into the whole thing about how the American economy has changed, but, that's less possible. And so I got off the phone. I was like, wow, I mean, I just so impressed. I mean, because they're the ones that are, for instance, helping to identify candidates and push these issues. So yeah, it seems like it's a really important thing to do so that, for instance, some of those women could become candidates, run, be elected, right? I mean, that would be, I do recall that this is a little trivia point on this, the only woman who actually, I believe Kelly lived in her district, who has ever been the majority leader in the Illinois House of Representatives, Barbara Curry, would tell you, and I think she talks about it a bit in my book, that she was able to run because her husband was a full-time tenured professor at the University of Chicago, and she was active in the League of Women Voters and an active volunteer, getting people to the polls and all the kinds of things one does. And then somebody said, well, gee, you ought to run, right? You know how to do this better than these guys you're helping.
Yeah.
I'm putting words in Barbara's mouth. But I think that's pretty true. Before we finish and say thank you, Abbie, if you would just, we've asked this question of a lot of our guests and it seems to be really helpful. Can you share with us sort of maybe a sort of out of the box idea that you have, it's something that you like to share with women that are thinking about running for office?
Yeah, I think back to when I was working on a project for my doctoral dissertation, and I was asking women about why they weren't running for office. And I was hearing from them that all of the stars need to align before they were willing to take that jump, right? So in their personal life, their kids had to be old enough. In their professional life, they had to be financially able and have the flexibility with their work. And then politically, they didn't want to challenge an incumbent. They wanted an open seat and they wanted it to be a pretty sure win, right? They were pretty risk averse. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these things are never going to come together. If you get 2 out of the 3, you're lucky, but all 3 of these things never happen. So you've got to just take the risk and take the jump. But when you do that, just know that there's a strong network of support of women around you who are invested in your success. And I always tell women when they're running for office, I will come clean your bathroom. There's nothing more stressful than having a dirty bathroom, but
sold, I'm going to run.
Knowing it's not going to get done because you have a million other things to do. So it's like, I will come and clean your toilets and wash your sinks so that you can go out there and do what only you can do best, which is represent the voters and the constituents and build the democracy that we all deserve.
Yes. I'm going to do it. I'm going to run for office now.
Fantastic.
So you will
and I'm going to come
and
clean your
clean my
bathroom.
toilet.
I'll make you a pie too. We'll make that part of the deal.
Yes. So that is actually my next question is, what is your favorite pie to bake?
Oh, well, it's all very seasonal. So my award-winning pie was a peach pie, but I think my favorite pie would be a rhubarb pie. I've got rhubarb growing in my backyard, so it's nice to be able to walk outside, cut some, and come home and make a pie. It reminds me of my grandmother.
Last Thanksgiving, my oven died while my pecan
Oh,
pie was
no.
still in the oven. So I'm hoping for a better Thanksgiving pie baking experience this year.
Fingers crossed.
And Rebecca, I'm not going to let you off the hook about talking about your upcoming book. So please talk about it.
Thank you. Well, it relates to what we've been talking about. I had felt for a while after writing Voter In that it would be important, another tool for all these fabulous women who are thinking about running and are running, if they could have some sort of a journal workbook that would help them work through the ideas they have, what they want to accomplish, the way they want to work with other people. So it's called Make Her Story Your Story. And the premise of it is a journal, a workbook, and the premise is that every woman can make her story, and her story in all caps, right? Not just the rich or the famous or anything like that. And that work everywhere is important. So it's very practical, kind of leads people through a series of steps about what to do and what to think about. And I'm hoping that it will engage women, particularly younger women, but not exclusively, in this process of journaling for their public life as well as they may be journaling for their private lives. So that's the goal. It's now, I can tell you, available on the internet for pre-sale. A little scary, but I've been through it before. So, and will be published January 2nd. So thank you for asking. And in that context, thank you, Abbie, for helping to create her story, right? Yourself, and for all of the women out there who are wanting to be helpful.
And Kelly, I don't know if Rebecca has shared with you a draft of the book, but I got to see a preview and it was incredibly inspiring. In fact, I don't think I made it 20 pages in before I had my notebook out and was scribbling a story down. So I eagerly await the release of the book.
Thank you. So before we leave, speaking of information and sharing information, would you, Abbie, tell our listeners where to find you and the fund?
Absolutely. So the Ascend Fund has a website, theascendfund.org. Additionally, we're on Twitter at the Ascend Fund, also on Instagram, or I too am on all the social platforms at Abbie Hodgson, and that's Hodgson.
Thank you ever so much, Abbie. It's great to talk with you. And I guess we're going to try the pie recipes, although for me, it'll be the peach and not the rhubarb.
That's okay. It's all delicious. There's no such thing as a bad pie.
Right.
Thank you, Abbie.
Thanks for having me.